The wind bit hard across the open land as the sun slid toward the mesa, setting the sky on fire. Jack Ballard rode slow along the fence line, reins loose in one hand, the other resting near the old Winchester slung across his saddle. The coyotes had been louder than usual last night, not just yipping but howling, like they'd found something worth the song that he didn't like that. His horse, Gus, whinnied and stopped short near a clump of brush. Jack narrowed his eyes. Buzzards circled overhead. A bad sign. He dismounted, boots crunching dry grass, spurs silent. A few steps forward and he saw it. Something half buried in branches, like the earth itself had tried to swallow it. He knelt. At first glance, it was just a tangled mess of torn hide and blood. But then her eyes opened to a girl, no more than 16, skin dusted with red clay, dark hair matted to her cheeks, breathing shallow. An arrow jutted from her thigh, snapped off halfway. Her lips were cracked, eyes glassy with fever. But, even in that state, her gaze hit him like a bullet. Comanche. Jack froze. There were stories. A white man taking in a Comanche girl, even to save her life, was as good as waving a war flag. But still, he didn't move. The girl blinked again, a silent plea behind all the pain. Damn it, Jack muttered under his breath. You picked the wrong patch of dirt to die on, kid. He lifted her carefully. She groaned and clawed weakly at his chest, but couldn't stop him. Her body was burning with fever and sunstroke, limbs limp like cloth. As he hoisted her onto the saddle, she winced and whispered something in Comanche. He didn't understand, but he felt it just the same. Back at the ranch, the land stretched wide and empty. 80 acres of cracked soil, thirsty grass, and silence. Jack hadn't spoken more than 10 words to another soul in a month. He'd built the place with his own hands after the war, after the fever took his wife and little girl. Since then, it had just been him, the cattle, and ghosts. He laid the girl on the long table inside, pushed the whiskey bottle aside, and started boiling water. He cleaned the wound. She writhed but didn't scream. That told him more about her than anything else. She was strong, trained. Wild as the hills that birthed her, he cut the arrowhead out with a hot blade. When he stitched her leg, she passed out from the pain. He sat there a long time afterward, the needle trembling in his fingers. He stared at her face, young, proud, hollowed by suffering. She's a child, he muttered aloud, like saying it would justify what he'd done, but he knew better. He remembered a fevered bed, a girl just as young, his daughter, her tiny hand slipping out of his. Maybe that's why he couldn't let this one go. He moved her to the cot in the spare room, tucked a blanket up to her shoulders, and bolted the door behind him. That night, he didn't sleep, just sat near the fire, boots on, rifle across his knees. The coyotes howled again. Only now, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like mourning. He must have dozed off. When his eyes opened again, the fire was a red glow and the night had settled deep into the walls. A creak. He turned, slow and quiet, not reaching for the rifle just yet. The girl stood in the doorway. Her eyes were wide. Her body trembled, not with weakness now, but with fear. And in her shaking hands was his hunting knife. She crossed the room before he could speak, and the cold of the blade touched the hollow of his throat. He didn't move, didn't breathe. She was wounded, sick, half-starved, but her hand didn't falter. Her breath came in fast, desperate gasps. Jack's voice was steady, low. You ain't in danger here. Her lip curled, a half-snarl. Lies. No lies. Just a man too stupid to walk past someone bleeding out in the dirt. For a long beat, they stood locked like that, man and girl, ghost and fire. Then her grip weakened. The knife clattered to the floor. She collapsed onto her knees. Jack stood slowly, rubbing the sting from his neck. A thin line of red glistened. There, she'd nicked him. I ain't your enemy, he said again, softer this time. She didn't answer, just stared at the flames in the hearth with hollow eyes, breathing like someone who hadn't decided yet if she was still alive. Jack looked down at her and realized something heavy and dangerous. This wasn't just a rescue. It was the start of something neither of them could walk away from. The girl wouldn't give her name. For 2 days, she sat on the cot in silence, one hand always within reach of whatever blade she could find, a paring knife, a fork, even a jagged horseshoe she'd pried loose from the wall. Her eyes followed Jack's every move like she expected betrayal in every footstep. She spoke in pieces, jagged English, bursts of Comanche. When she didn't understand, she stayed still. When she did, she glared like his words were arrows. Jack didn't push. He boiled herbs he half remembered from an old army surgeon, poultices that stank but pulled fever from her skin. She winced every time he touched her, but never cried out. That, more than anything, reminded him of the war. The girl had a soldier's spine point. One morning, she tried to escape. He'd gone out to feed the horses. Came back to the door hanging open, the cot empty, blood drops on the floor. Hell, he muttered. Grabbing his rifle, he found her not 100 yards from the house, hobbling through the dry grass, dragging her leg, face pale as bone. She collapsed before he reached her. He knelt beside her. She was too weak to lift her head, but her voice still hissed with pride. You not keep me. Jack didn't answer, just picked her up again, carried her back, and laid her down that night. He drank whiskey on the porch while coyotes howled under the stars. Her words echoed in his head. You not keep me. God, how many people had tried to keep someone? His wife, Annie, she'd begged him not to go to war. And when he came back, he wasn't the man who left. 1,000 yards in his stare, a shadow on his shoulder. She left with their daughter before the fever took them both. He'd built fences ever since. Around his land, around his heart. That be why the next morning, she was talking more, mostly curses. Sometimes half laughed when he misunderstood. Your Comanche's awful, she said once, smirking with split lips. Yours ain't so good either, he shot back. Guess that makes us even. He caught her watching how he wrapped her wound, how he loaded the firewood. Eyes like flint, learning every move. She never thanked him. But when he tossed her a small log and motioned to the axe, she didn't hesitate. She chopped clumsily, winced at the strain, but kept going. Later that week, she watched him saddle Gus for the morning ride. Didn't speak, just studied the motion like it might save her life. Tea supper. She finally spoke soft. Tiva. Jack looked up from the stew. My name is Tiva. He nodded, slow. Tiva. She didn't look at him when she added, quieter still. They left me. My people. My brother thought I was dead. Arrow wasn't theirs. White men ambushed. Left me to rot. Jack didn't know what to say. His hand tightened around his spoon. I'm sorry, he said. Tiva gave a dry laugh. You didn't shoot the arrow. No. But plenty of men. Like me did. She looked him in the eye. You different? I don't know, Jack answered. Not sure that matters now. By the third week, she was walking better. Still limped, but with purpose. She stitched one of his shirts without being asked, sat by the fire, muttering in Comanche, sewing like she'd done it 1,000 times. In return, he carved a walking stick from pine, smooth, sturdy, and marked with small etchings he remembered from Comanche blankets. She took it without a word. But the next morning, she was using it. They moved in a strange rhythm, like two animals who'd learned to share the same waterhole point. One day, she laughed, really laughed, when Gus tried to chew his own reins. It startled Jack more than any knife ever could. That night, he didn't sit on the porch. He sat beside the fire inside, across from her. Silence, but not the sharp kind. A quiet filled with something that might become trust. Voiceover. He didn't know what she'd been through, but he knew she was a storm waiting for the right wind. The next morning was dry, cold, and too still. Tiva stood on the porch with her walking stick. She wasn't looking at the land. She was scanning the horizon like a hawk. Then she stiffened. She pointed toward the far ridge, eyes wide. Jack stepped out beside her and followed her finger down a thin line of dust, rising fast, more than horses. A whole storm of riders. Dozens. Maybe more. Jack's stomach dropped. Yours? He asked. She didn't answer. Her hand gripped the porch rail until her knuckles turned white. The ground trembled before the hooves were ever seen. By the time Jack and Tiva stood out by the corral, the dust cloud had become men, nearly 50 of them, riding hard over the ridge in a V formation that cut the land like a blade. The lead rider's horse was painted with white handprints across its chest. Feathers trailed from his hair, his bare chest streaked with ochre and ash. The war party wasn't just coming. It was descending. Jack didn't grab his rifle. He didn't shut the barn doors. He just stood there, boots rooted to dirt, heart thudding like a war drum. Tiva stepped forward without a word. Tiva, Jack hissed, trying to grab her arm. She slipped his hand. Her limp was gone. Or maybe she just ignored it. She walked straight into the wind as the riders fanned out around the ranch. Hooves pounded close. The dust stung Jack's eyes. He didn't blink. Tiva raised her hands, speaking fast in Comanche, her voice slicing through the air. The lead rider dismounted, tall, sharp-jawed, no older than 30, but his presence aged him, like war had carved him deeper than years could. He wore a single necklace of bare claws, and his gaze could freeze bone. Red Elk. Jack knew the name. Tiva ran to him, her voice cracking now, shaking with emotion. She grabbed his wrist. He stared down at her like she was a ghost. His hand rose, and for a split second, Jack thought he'd strike her, but he didn't. He touched her face instead, and then he looked past her. At Jack, a shout came from one of the mounted warriors. He raised his bow. The arrow struck the dirt, inches from Jack's left boot. Still, Jack didn't move. "You have one breath to explain," Red Elk said in perfect English, voice like gravel over fire. Jack didn't flinch. "She was bleeding out. In the brush. I didn't put her there, but I sure as hell didn't leave her. She is Comanche. She's human." The men murmured. Several reached for tomahawks. Red Elk narrowed his eyes. "We believed her. Dead. Her blood was left in the red clay. But now she lives in your house." Jack shook his head. "She lived because I gave her water. Because I pulled an arrow from her thigh when she couldn't. That's it." Red Elk's face was unreadable. Tiva stepped forward. "Brother, he showed me mercy. Not chains. I tried to run. He let me. I tried to fight. He didn't hurt me. He gave me food. Gave me name again." "You already had a name," Red Elk said coldly. "You left it behind with me," she snapped. A ripple of shock ran through the warriors. Another stepped forward, a man with one eye and a jagged scar across his chest. "He took her, used her, made her his." Tiva's voice cracked. "No, he didn't. He didn't even ask my name until I gave it. He gave me choice. You gave me nothing." Red Elk raised a hand. Silence fell like thunder that he looked at Jack for a long time. "You know nothing of us. Nothing of our dead. Nothing of the fire we ride through." "I don't pretend to," Jack said quietly. "But I've seen fire. And I've buried my own." Red Elk considered that. His jaw clenched, then relaxed. "If you speak of fire," he said slowly, "then come ride through it." Jack squinted. "Ride?" he asked. Red Elk nodded. "Tomorrow. With us. See what we see. Stand in our pain if you want to claim you understand." The challenge was clear. Not just a test of trust, but a dare. Tiva turned, face pale. "You don't have to." "I know," Jack said. "But I will." Red Elk stepped close. They, two men just feet apart now, one in deer hide, one in dust-stained denim. "If you run," Red Elk whispered, "you will die." "If I run," Jack replied, "I wouldn't be worth burying." The war party rode off just before sunset, vanishing over the hills like ghosts returning to dirt. Tiva stayed. That night, Jack didn't sleep. Neither did she. She sat by the fire, turning her walking stick in her hand over and over. He poured 2 cups of coffee, but only drank one. They didn't speak at dawn. He saddled Gus that he wore no gun. Just his old cavalry jacket, frayed at the seams. Tiva stood in the doorway as he mounted up. Her eyes didn't plead. They didn't warn. They only watched. "You'll come back," she said. Jack didn't smile, just tipped his hat. "I reckon I will." And then he rode out, a pale speck beside 50 shadows disappearing into the rising sun. They rode until the sun stood high over the canyon spines, baking the world in white heat. Jack had never seen such quiet from 50 men on horseback. No shouts, no boasts, just silence, like the land itself was in mourning. Red Elk led them across mesas and dry gullies until they reached a place the wind didn't dare move. The massacre lay in the dust. 3 wagons burned down to their iron frames, still smoldering. A wheel hung on the branch of a twisted oak like a broken limb. Dead horses curled like fallen statues. There were settler bodies, women, men, 2 children, and among them, Comanche warriors. 3 of them, stripped of paint and dignity, their braids hacked off, left to rot in the sun like animals. Jack dismounted slowly, mouth dry. He crouched by a boy, couldn't have been older than 11. Gunpowder burns on his shirt. A small knife still clutched in his hand. This wasn't a battle, Jack said softly. This was revenge. Red Elk stood behind him, arms folded across his chest. The settlers struck first, he said. They blamed raids, and they wanted to send a message. You'll want to send one back, Jack guessed. Red Elk nodded once. The next wagon. Train rides through tomorrow. Merchants. Traders. Same breed. Jack looked at the dead again. I've seen this story before, he said. In Tennessee. In Virginia. In Mexico. The blood never ends. It just changes color. One of the younger warriors spit in the dirt. You speak peace because you're afraid. Jack stood. Faced him. I speak peace because I've buried enough to know the cost. You think you'll win by killing 5 traitors? You'll start a fire you can't put out. You'll lose more daughters than you'll avenge. The words hit hard, especially for Red Elk. He glanced at the smallest of the dead warriors, a boy who looked like he could have been Tiva's cousin. Then back at Jack. What would you have us do? He asked bitterly. Let the fire die with today, Jack said. Choose another kind of power. A long silence. Then, hoofbeats. Behind them, from the canyon's edge, came Tiva. She rode bareback, braid whipping in the wind, her walking stick slung behind her like a spear. She dismounted beside them and walked into the circle of warriors without fear. I will stay, she said clearly. With the rancher. Gasps. Murmurs. One warrior grabbed his tomahawk, but Red Elk raised a hand. Why? He asked. She faced her brother. Because I can speak to both sides now. You raised me to fight. He taught me to build. I can be a bridge between what was and what could be. Red Elk studied her for a long time. The canyon wind ruffled his feathers. Then he removed the bear claw necklace from his neck, walked to her, placed it gently around hers. You are Comanche, he said, voice soft. But you choose your road. She bowed her head. I will not dishonor you. He nodded once, then turned to Jack. You ride with fire in your blood, but you carry water in your heart. Guard her well. I will, Jack said. No handshake. No salute. Just a shared look. 2 men who'd both seen too much to speak plainly. Red Elk mounted his horse, and the warriors rode out like smoke on the wind. The ranch was quiet when they returned. Tiva unsaddled her own horse. Jack watched her. She moved like someone who didn't need help anymore. Later that week, he taught her how to brand a calf. She flinched at the smell of singed hair, but her grip held steady. You don't have to do this, he told her. I want to, she said. She wore the bear claw necklace over her shirt now. Wore it like armor, not of war, but of memory. That evening, she fixed the porch rail. He brought her coffee and didn't say a word. They watched the horizon together as the last light bled into the dirt. Final voiceover. She didn't need saving. Just someone who didn't look away. And he didn't need a daughter. Just a reason to remember he was still a man.